Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today I will be continuing to read Black Panther, the Young Prince. So let's continue. Chapter 7. T'Challa jumped up and peered around the room. For a moment, he didn't know where he was, until it all came rushing back to him. I'm in America. Chicago. I'm going to school here. M'Baku grimaced. What in the name of the Panther God is that racket? T'Challa followed the sound to a clock on the bedside table. The red digital numbers flashed 7 o'clock a.m. He knew he hadn't said it. Someone from the embassy must have programmed it earlier. He hit the off button.
Who's that?
M'Baku said warily. I guess we better find out, T'Challa replied. He got up and threw one of the fluffy robes he'd retrieved from the closet. Coming, he called, pulling the robe around him. He opened the door as M'Baku ducked into the bathroom. T'Challa was met by a man in a black butler's uniform, standing behind a cart stacked with silver trays and pitchers of water and juice. Breakfast is served, sirs. T'Challa stepped aside, and the man rolled his cart onto the hardwood floor. As T'Challa watched, the man made a very slow display of uncovering every dish with a flourish. After he left, M'Baku came out of the bathroom with wet hair. What is that? He asked, rubbing a towel on his head. T'Challa lifted one of the round metal domes. Breakfast? M'Baku came closer, peering at the food. What are yummy flakes? He asked, pointing to a box displaying a smiling boy with a spoon in his mouth. T'Challa tore open the box and looked at the small flakes of what looked like shredded tree bark. I don't know, he said, and popped a few pieces in his mouth. His face soured. Yick, he said. Let me try, M'Baku offered. He took a handful, threw back his head, and poured a bunch of flakes down his throat. He chewed for a second, considering, and then downed a glass of milk. Not bad, he said. T'Challa surveyed the tray again. He was confused. There were several round pieces of fried bread, but they had holes in the middle. Some were dark, and some were light, and some were sprinkled with little colored dots. Looks like they don't have a very good bread maker here, M'Baku said. They can't even make bread without putting a hole in it. I've seen these before, T'Challa said. It's called a donut. I saw it in an American movie. Dough what? M'Baku asked skeptically. T'Challa picked one up. He took a bite and chewed. Pretty good, he said after a minute. Tastes like chocolate. M'Baku eyed a donut with sprinkles. Here goes, he said, and stuffed the whole thing in his mouth. He looked at T'Challa as he chewed, and then, with great effort, he swallowed loudly. His face suddenly went pale. Uh-oh, he said. What? Asked T'Challa. My stomach hurts again. A half hour later, after M'Baku had several visits to the bathroom, the boys headed to the lobby. Men and women in business suits walked with purpose down the long corridors. People sat at tables in the lobby with their laptops open in front of them. T'Challa hadn't made eye contact with anyone since they arrived. Everyone's heads were buried in their phones. A man stood behind the counter, tapping away at a keyboard. He looked up, and his eyes widened. Ah, I see you're ready for school. Was your room to your liking? He must know who we are, T'Challa thought. Yes, he answered. Thank you. The man, whose glasses rested on his nose, turned to M'Baku. Are you okay, young man? M'Baku swallowed. Yeah, I, had too much sweet stuff. The man nodded. I see. Well, the snack bar is refilled every night, but you don't have to eat it all. He leaned over the counter and lowered his voice. I do understand the temptation, though. M'Baku didn't answer. He just slowly bobbed his head. T'Challa couldn't help but snicker. "Now," the concierge said, straightening back up and pointing over the boys' heads. "Through the revolving door and then across the street. You'll want the number 134 bus to the south side." He clapped on his computer, and two small cards slid out of a black box. "These are bus passes. They're loaded up with fare money to get you around the city. Let me know when they run short." He slid the cards across the smooth counter. "Dinner will be served in your room at 7 p.m. every night. If you need anything at all, just let me know." He pointed to his name tag. T'Challa leaned in. "Thank you, Clarence," he said. M'Baku groaned, but still managed a half smile. "I hope we don't miss the bus," T'Challa said, rubbing his arms and craning his neck to see down the street. He shivered. Neither one of the boys had winter coats. How could someone have forgotten to get them coats? Perhaps Clarence at the embassy could give them some. They certainly wouldn't be able to make it through the Chicago winter without them. Michigan Avenue was a bustle of activity. Buses, cars, motorcycles, pedestrians, bicycles. T'Challa even saw a kid on a skateboard. All fought for the fastest and least congested lanes and sidewalk. M'Baku looked up at one of the tallest buildings, its pinnacle lost in white fog. "Well," he said, "it's definitely a big city, but Wakanda is more—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Captivating?" T'Challa ventured. "Exactly," M'Baku answered. "Captivating." That was the right word, T'Challa realized. Even though Chicago was big, it couldn't match the grand elegance of Wakanda, with its dazzling architecture and unique culture. For a brief moment, he thought of his father. Does he miss me yet? Or is his mind occupied with the possible threat from Ulysses' claw? T'Challa looked down the street again. He did a double take. There, in the center of all the rushing pedestrians on the sidewalk, a man was standing completely still. He stood out because of his height, and the military beret he wore did nothing to make him blend in. And he was looking directly at T'Challa. He reached out to nudge M'Baku, but his attention was startled by a creaking, groaning sound. A blue and white city bus with the number 134 pulsing in a weak orange light above the massive windshield was headed in their direction. "That must be for us," M'Baku said. The bus pulled up to the curve and released a hiss. A door flew open. T'Challa glanced down the street again, but the man had vanished. He placed his foot on the little step and was immediately jostled and bumped by a horde of people getting off. They looked at him with annoyed faces. "Great," said M'Baku. The boys took a step back and waited as the passengers got off, then made their way onto the bus. T'Challa took out the card Clarence had given him and handed it to the bus driver. The driver, a big man with a beard, looked at T'Challa and raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you, young man?" "Yes," T'Challa replied. "We're going to Southside Middle School. I think this card has our bus money on it." The man closed his eyes and then opened them again slowly. "Son," he said, "touch the card against the reader." T'Challa looked down and saw a round column with a flat surface on top. "What's the hold up?" M'Baku complained behind him, peeking over T'Challa's shoulder. T'Challa placed the card on the reader. "Beep!" "There you go," the driver said. T'Challa turned to find a seat. Everyone on the bus was staring at him. He gulped. Fortunately for M'Baku, T'Challa had already embarrassed himself trying to pay his fare, so he didn't have to suffer the same fate. Men and women in business suits stood in the aisle, their attention now back to their cell phones. It seemed that every seat was taken, either by a person, a book bag, or a briefcase. T'Challa noticed several kids his age, fiddling with their phones and not talking to each other. M'Baku was the first one to find a seat, and sat next to a girl wearing headphones who only stared out of the window. T'Challa looked left and right as he continued down the aisle. The bus came to a stop, and he flew forward, barely righting himself. As he did, he saw that the seat in front of him was empty. "Is this seat available?" he asked. A small, skinny boy looked up from a graphic novel he was reading. "What's that?" "I asked if anyone is sitting here," T'Challa said. The boy looked at the empty seat and then back to T'Challa. Nope," he said. T'Challa slid into the seat. The bus lurched as he flew forward again. He sighed. He wasn't even at school yet, and he felt like he'd already been through an ordeal. T'Challa sat and watched as more passengers got on, mostly business people, but he also saw a lot of teenagers, most of them with backpacks and wearing headphones. The seat was uncomfortable, but every bump and jolt made it even worse. They sat in traffic for what seemed like hours. A blast of heat came through the vents, and T'Challa felt sweat on his back. He turned to the boy next to him. "Hi, this bus goes to Southside Middle School, right?" The boy slid his glasses up his nose with one finger. "Yeah, it's like this every morning. Total bummer." T'Challa didn't know what the boy meant. "Are you new here?" the boy asked. He nodded in the direction of M'Baku. "I've never seen you or your friend before." "Oh," T'Challa said. "Yes, we're new." "I'm Ezekiel," the boy said. "Actually, everyone calls me Zeke." T'Challa froze. "What's my name? Father said to keep my identity a secret, but he never gave me an alias." T'Challa fidgeted in his seat. Think, he shouted inside his head. "I'm T," he blurted out. "T. Charles." "Oh, hey, T. Charles," Zeke replied. T'Challa sighed a breath of relief. T. Charles, he thought. Not bad. After a bumpy ride on the city streets, the magnificent mile was left behind, and the bus continued on the south side, onto the south side. They passed fast food restaurants, electronic stores, check cashing places, and what seemed like 100 pawn shops. Finally, the bus pulled into a neighborhood with large homes on both sides of the street. After a few more turns, the bus wheezed and came to a stop. Everyone except the adults filled out. T'Challa looked through the window. "Where's the school?" "Just around the corner," Zeke said. "This is the closest stop. Come on, I'll show you the way." "Oh," T'Challa said. "Okay, thanks." He found M'Baku in the crowd, and they exited together. A minute or two later, T'Challa stood on the cracked sidewalk and took in his surroundings. Southside Middle School was a giant old mansion covered in ivy. Several small brick buildings fanned out from a larger one with a massive clock tower. The whole place was bordered by a fence. T'Challa couldn't help but think of a prison he had seen in Wakanda. There was only one, and it was reserved for the worst offenders and enemies of the king. "Come on," Zeke said. "Let me show you where to go." He led T'Challa and M'Baku into the school. As soon as the door was opened, T'Challa was assaulted by the symphony of noise. Metal lockers clanging shut, students shouting at the top of their lungs, and teachers pleading for quiet. Most noticeable of all, though, was the music, which seemed to reverberate along his bones. At least T'Challa thought it was music. He had never heard anything like it in his life. A few words drifted from one boy's portable radio, a massive box with 2 speakers. "I'm cooler than ice and twice as nice. Watch me flow down real low like Curly and Moe." T'Challa suddenly remembered that his father said there was something they should do right away when they arrived at the school. "We're supposed to meet the principal," he said to Zeke. Zeke's eyes widened, looking from T'Challa to M'Baku. "You want to see the principal? On purpose?" "Yeah," M'Baku piped up. Zeke raised an eyebrow. "Okay," he said hesitantly. T'Challa and M'Baku traded wary glances. Zeke led them both to an office with a frosted glass window that read Principal. Inside, a man with glasses sat behind a desk, typing on a computer. "Good morning, Ezekiel," he said with a smile. His teeth were very straight and white, T'Challa noticed. "How can I help you today?" Zeke stepped forward. "This is T," he said, pointing to T'Challa. "T. Charles." He turned to M'Baku. "And this is his friend." M'Baku swallowed. "Marcus," T'Challa said, coming to his rescue. M'Baku nodded along, relieved. T'Challa wasn't sure if he needed an alias or not, and they hadn't even thought to talk about it. "Ah," the man said, his eyes lighting up. "The exchange students from Kenya?" Right," T'Challa stammered. "I'm Mr. Walker," the man said. "Mrs. Deacon's assistant." He studied them both for a moment. "My wife and I were in Kenya last year. Beautiful country. Where exactly?" "We really need to see the principal," M'Baku cut in. "For our class schedules?" "Ah," Mr. Walker said, glancing at his watch. "Yes, it is getting on in the morning. I'll let her know." "Thank you," T'Challa said. The principal, Mrs. Deacon, was a tall woman with close-cropped hair and quick, bird-like eyes. T'Challa studied the rules she had just gone over with them. No one allowed in the halls during class without a pass. No food or soda except in the cafeteria. No bullying. No chewing gum. No music, which T'Challa thought strange, considering all the music he'd heard in the hallway. Mrs. Deacon printed out their class schedules, and T'Challa looked at all the subjects: Advanced English, Social Studies, French, which he was already fluent in, Art Exploration, Advanced Sciences, Physical Education, and several more classes. M'Baku stared at the list, aghast. "All of those?" he whispered, but loud enough for Mrs. Deacon to hear. "Oh, yes," she said. "That's just first semester." M'Baku gulped.